Hey everybody, Jason Rink here, coming at you from behind the silicon curtain from my deplatforming from Facebook and Twitter. So I have very few avenues to get my thoughts out into the world, and so doing what I probably should have started doing a long time ago, which is talking into a camera, talking into my phone, and just like giving my thoughts about things. So I'm in Phoenix, Arizona right now, and some of you probably know for the last 10 weeks, I guess, I've been doing a documentary on the election integrity issue and following the grassroots movement around the country. Have been covering that from inside that movement, had really unprecedented access to a lot of people that weren't talking to other people as freely as they were. We got a lot of behind the scenes content, really got into the minds and the heads, and got to know a lot of the people who are currently also deplatformed as well. And so that documentary took us all over the place, and obviously, we knew for a long time that there was going to be the certification of the electoral votes on January 6th. And, for many weeks leading up to that, the grassroots movement was attempting to generate senators and representatives who would object to those electoral votes. Now, some people are not aware that objecting to electoral votes by senators and representatives has happened in many, many elections in the last 20 years. In fact, I think it's happened in almost every one to some certain degree. Frankly, in the past, I think most of the time it lacked both a senator and a representative to object to certain electors, and therefore didn't trigger the 2-hour debates that were supposed to ensue as a result of that. And so the goal of the grassroots and all of the effort and time and political pressure that was being generated was in order to create what would have been a 1 or 2 day set of debates in order for what is considered the evidence that hasn't been given a place, hasn't been given a courtroom to hear it. And I know a lot of people say, yeah, all this stuff's been thrown out of court, all of it was frivolous, the evidence is no merit. And, I can just tell you from being involved in this, talking to state representatives, talking to grassroots leaders, talking to data analysts for interviews and those types of things, I can tell you that that's just not true. Now, what the conclusions of the evidence are, I think people need to see it. I think there needs to be discovery, all of these other things that have not happened for a number of reasons. But leaving that aside, when we went to the Capitol on the 6th, meaning to the grounds of the Capitol, I will say right now, never went inside the Capitol. That's pretty clear. There's not been any assertions that I have. We had film crews that were filming around the Capitol. None of our film crews went inside the Capitol. But what I can say is that the breach and entry into the Capitol was not something that was ever promoted or desired by those that I was working with in the grassroots movement, because it would have been contrary to the goals that were actually being sought with the events on the 6th, which was to get those debates to happen. And the breach on the Capitol resulted in those being shut down for a time, and then some representatives actually reversing course and changing their position on it. So it actually did damage to what was the desired goal. So that's just something I wanted to get out there. I also wanted to say that during that time, something interesting happened, and some of you also know this, that because we'd been tracking this story for a long time, we had the opportunity to interview Jake Angeli, I believe on December 11th in Washington, D.C., because we met him out in front of the Supreme Court. He was drumming and chanting, and very interesting guy. We had seen him a number of places around the country. We'd seen him in Arizona a couple of times, or at least one time before that. And so when we saw Jake, my co-director Paul said, "Hey, let's interview that guy. He's really interesting." It was actually the first interview we did for the Steel movie, and we didn't even know if it would fit into it or not, fit into the movie. We just thought, hey, he's an interesting guy. He's on the grassroots. He obviously cares about this stuff. Let's find out what he's about. So we sat down with him for an hour, and really didn't think we'd see him again, or didn't know whether or not we would, run into him again. And so then on the day of the 6th, I was actually out on the Capitol grounds, outside of the Capitol, on the backside of the Capitol, because I was setting up. I had a video team there setting up for a permitted event, speeches that were going to be given throughout the day while the Congress was meeting on the electoral issues. Well, that event never happened, but what did happen was I found myself, I went over to the Capitol grounds early, and so I was actually there before Trump's speech was done and witnessed the first groups of people, jumping over the fences. It was a little bit of chaos, but it wasn't that many people. It was like hundreds of people at that point, but there was waves of thousands right behind them. And so at that point I knew something was going down. And so while I was kind of on the grounds just witnessing what was happening, I was actually on the backside of the Capitol at that point. I worked my way over there. I don't know, a couple hours into it, or however long it was, my co-director Paul was actually at the hotel watching social media to see what happened, and he ended up sending me the picture of Jake Angeli, Buffalo Man, and he was like, Jake got inside. And he was referring to the fact that this guy that we had interviewed a few weeks back had actually gotten inside of the Capitol and was now the iconic photo of the day. And within a few hours, memes were being generated about this guy. And so we had his cell phone number. He knew who we were. And so we set up an interview with him almost immediately. We said, hey, why don't you come sit down and talk to us and tell us your story. Tell us what happened and give us your thoughts, because there's a narrative already being generated out in the world, and we'd like to help you get in front of that. Just get your side of the story. And so that's what we did, and that was on the 7th, morning of the 7th, and Jake ended up hopping in a car and driving back to Arizona at that point. And so essentially what happened is we found ourselves in the middle of what I think are really two of the biggest stories in America, and likely two of the biggest stories that are going to affect, many things in this country to come. One being the issue of election integrity, the grassroots movement around it, what really happened, and whether or not there was, seditious acts being planned, all of that sort of thing. On the other side, we managed to get the only exclusive sit-down interview with the iconic figure of the day. And so what we decided to do is make a bit of a pivot, and begin to commit to producing a documentary that we could get out almost immediately, or as fast as we can, on Jake Angeli. So we're actually here in Phoenix right now because we're doing additional interviews for that project. And yesterday, Jake was actually got his hearing. And what ended up happening at that hearing was it was determined whether or not he was going to be able to be released on bail between now and when his actual court case is going to be heard, which at this point it's hard to say when that could happen. It could be weeks. It's likely going to be months. I don't know. But this was going to decide whether he was going to have to sit in jail or be able to be free, monitored, under house arrest, whatever, until that trial. And some other individuals have been released in that way, but not Jake. Yesterday, a judge decided that, number one, he's looking at up to 26 years possibly for what he did in the Capitol, and also said that he poses too much of a danger and a flight risk to be released. So he's going to stay in jail, and he's, I believe, going to be taken to DC, where he's going to be held in some sort of federal holding place at that point. And, I just wanted to take a moment because, for the last few months, I haven't been super vocal about my work here and about my thoughts here. And the first thing I want to say is there are a lot of people who are reading about these events in the media, and yet there aren't very many people that I know who spent the last 2.5 months immersed in this stuff. And when I say immersed in it, I say 4 to 6 hours a day in research and consuming content, reading affidavits, reading court filings, watching hearings, talking and interviewing to key people who are involved. And specifically in this case of Jake Angeli, I can tell you that I don't know that there's anybody else who's had the kind of conversations over multiple hours that we've had with him in the context that we've had him. I don't know that many people who've talked to relatives and friends of his. I don't know that many people who, in my opinion, have as much information direct from sources as we do about both Jake and the movement that led to the events on the 6th. And right now, I had some thoughts about Jake, really, and my first thought is that I believe that we may be witnessing the government really trying to make an example of him, because in the hearing he had yesterday, the judge even admitted this guy has never had a single encounter with the law. He has not even received a parking ticket. He's never had or exhibited any behavior that people would have considered dangerous to himself or society. What they did do was they took some reporting and some statements from the federal government, or I don't even really know where the statements came from, but the idea that really the day of his hearing yesterday, there was reports that was like, yeah, there was evidence that people were trying to take hostages or even kill members of government who came into the Capitol. And frankly, what's interesting is almost right after the judge said that he couldn't be released on bail, couldn't be monitored, he had to remain locked up, that was part of the evidence used to generate that result. And less than an hour later, it might have even been while it was happening, somebody in the federal government, I forget the guy's name, said, no, there's no direct evidence of that. They've walked back those charges because now they're starting to get more information, and they're recognizing that while, going in there and doing what they did was likely not legal over certain ways, according to certain things, that the evidence that Jake specifically, and I'm only speaking about Jake right now, had any intention of kidnapping, hurting, injuring any person there, is they don't have it. And yet it's being used to hold this man, until a trial. And that happens. I get it. But I do also see that there is not a consistency being applied around this right now. You're seeing some very strange things happening. You're seeing political ends being driven. And again, I am concerned about, him becoming essentially like a political prisoner, because I don't know that the evidence will actually support the stronger charges that could put him away for a long time. But I do believe that the political climate will potentially support it. And especially in the public eye, where all people have is media narratives being generated around this guy, who is essentially an eccentric individual who has certainly unconventional beliefs, but not somebody who has demonstrated himself to be anything less than really a peaceful person, and somebody who's really just wanted to exercise his constitutional rights of redress of grievances and protest. And we're gonna have a lot of conversations about the amount of wisdom to enter the Capitol. I mean, I had the opportunity. I could have followed the crowd and gone in there, and fortunately, I'm 46 years old, and so I have had a certain amount of wisdom, I think. And some people might say I didn't have the courage to do it, and that's fine. I got it. The journalist in me really wanted to go in there. I wanted to go in there with a camera. Don't get me wrong, but I recognized it was probably not going to be a good idea, and that the end result of this event was not going to be good. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to get those thoughts out there. Those are the thoughts I'm having today as I'm sitting here in Phoenix. And I don't know how frequently I'm going to post videos like this, but I'm posting one now. I don't know how I'm going to get it out there. I'm going to send it to some of my friends, see if they'll post it on Facebook for me, and go from there. So anyway, if you're interested in finding out about what I'm up to, somehow the Twitter account for our movie, The Steel movie, is still up, and our website, thesteel.com, is still up. So anyway, take it easy. Talk to you soon.